welcome in. On behalf of the Bermuda National Trust, I'm delighted to introduce to you this evening Emrys Harries, who is going to tell us the remarkable story of Joseph Packwood, the boy in the portrait at Verdemont. Emrys and I came across each other in unusual circumstances about a year ago when, as part of my job as museums manager, I was ferreting around seeing who was using our images, and I came across Emrys on ancestry.com, and he was using the images of the portraits at Verdemont, and we immediately struck up a conversation. And that conversation led to this extraordinary discovery of his incredible genealogy work into his wife's family. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Emrys Harries, who's going to tell us the story of Joseph Packwood, the boy in the painting.
Hi there, everybody. I'll kick straight in. If you hear paper rustling, it's because I'm old school and I've got this on paper. So there you go. Joseph Packwood, the boy in the painting. I'm a family historian and I spend a lot of my time chasing the cold threads and musty ghosts of my Welsh ancestors. Mostly just peasants, their faces lost forever, who spend all too brief lives clicking into hillsides in pre-industrial Carmarthenshire, and now sailing through eternity under wet slate headstones. They left few clues, fewer photographs, and not one painted portrait. To be honest, it came as a relief to make a change and take a look at my wife Bunny's Bermuda family instead. As you all know, Bermuda is a historian's dream destination, and the air-conditioned cabin of the Archive Service is a welcome and welcoming refuge from heat and humidity for misplaced Welshmen. Family history is interesting. It's just that other people's family history seldom has the same charm. But I came across an untold Bermuda story which could change that. Genealogy research, peering into catalogues, records, images, seeing the work of others and duplicating or learning from their mistakes. A mistake from a fellow researcher led me to Verdemont House in Smiths. Karen, an American, had been trawling through early records of seafaring Packwood families and had come across a Captain Joseph Packwood. This particular Joseph Packwood, there was more than one, would prove to be a red herring for Karen, but a windfall for me. The name resonated because of my own research into Bunny's Packwood line, which had stalled at a Robert Packwood, her great-great-great-grandfather, for whom I had an unbroken documentary paper trail, but for all my searching without finding a reliable father for him. I did have a copy of William Vernon Jackson's well-known Packwood family tree, from the Bermuda Archive Service, no less, which shows a Joseph Packwood as Robert's father, yet without any supporting evidence or references. Without proof, of course, there could be no place for Joseph in my own work. Now, Karen had taken some tempting search engine bait, a detailed will held by the UK National Archives, which she hoped would help her, Captain's evidential line. It's in English, as you can see, in all but impenetrable goose quill handwriting. Joseph Packwood's last will and testament, still a work in progress, was a decrypting struggle that Karen had been fighting alone for a while before we joined forces. She'd uncovered that Bermuda and Verdemont were significant and had unpicked some enticing names and relationships, notably that Joseph Packwood and Samuel Trott were cousins. Samuel inherited Verdemont from after the Greens had died in 1803. I imagine that had Joseph chosen a career which had kept him on the island, he might also have been a potential beneficiary. But that's not how things unfolded. Samuel died in 1817, leaving his widow Sarah and their 4 children, all of whom had a place in Joseph's will for the benefit of money, but also of items which Joseph plainly held dear, mostly from his naval career. These included presentation swords which he'd been gifted, his uniform, pistols and spyglasses, the sort of things which should really find a place with family. Intriguingly, a London-made telescope, spyglass of the right age, is part of the present-day Verdemont Owners' Artifacts exhibit, just such an item having been bequeathed to Samuel's son, John Henry Trott, by Joseph. Perhaps it was his. Included in the will was a candidate for my own research, free man of colour, Robert Packwood. But just because my Robert Packwood and shared a name and status with a beneficiary son in the will, was no reason to suppose that they were the same man. I had to learn more about Joseph and Robert before I could add another great to the grandfather line. Now, Karen had never visited Bermuda, but her meticulous pursuit of the wrong Joseph Packwood had led her to the National Trust Verdemont material you can find online if you look hard enough. That includes the John Green paintings at Verdemont House with the bright, handsome boy and his dog above the parlour fireplace. I looked into his eyes and wondered if he really was the next link in the chain. Successful genealogy mostly follows an obvious route. You need to be on firm ground before you take the next step into the mire, working from what you know and can prove towards that which you don't, rather than the other way around. I allowed myself an exception to that because I hadn't given in to temptation. I'd only lightly penciled Joseph into the tree. To ink him in, I'd need to be lucky, find all there was to find, and confirm that my Robert Packwood and Robert Packwood in the will really were the same man. Do your own research is the clarion call of genealogy and the very best advice. But it's not going to make friends of those whose earlier work is shown to fall short. That can be because before the internet opened things up, much material simply wasn't available, especially internationally. There's a danger, certainly on an island, of looking inwards, not outwards, for the answers. And as things unlock and develop, some research can be shown to be either incomplete, assumptive, or plain wrong. Whatever the reason, in Bermuda, this can mean asking questions of, if not stepping on the toes of, principal genealogist Clara Hollis Hullett, or heaven help me, revered historian Cyril Atterbridge Packwood. There'll be those for whom this is heresy of the highest order, but I'll stand by my own research. For now, we'll leave my wife's line to Robert and deal with Joseph. Among the impressively preserved and catalogued records of the Bermuda archives, I've not been able to find the circa 1762 birth or baptism of Joseph Packwood. There are no assumptions to be made. He could easily have been born at or near Verdemont in Smiths, and baptised at St. Mark's, which presents a significant problem as many records from there, including from the period of his birth, were lost in a 19th century fire. A disastrous further fire then tragically incinerated some of the rescued registers in their safe floating resting place. That may well have put paid to Joseph's records. A trawl through Clara Hollis Hallett's Packwood files does find Joseph, but only as a brief mention without detail, which suggests that she fell at the same charred historical hurdle that I did. There's a lot we don't have. What we do have are a wealth of newspaper reports from both Bermuda and the UK to corroborate Joseph's contemporary naval biography and give some detail of his later life. We also, of course, have his will. At the time of his death in Naples in 1835, Joseph was a retired Royal Navy post-captain. A post-captain was a term used to distinguish the rank held rather than just the command of a vessel, and that he had been in post or actually had command at sea. His will provides an appreciation of him as a man, as well as the considerable wealth that he had accumulated during a varied and clearly exciting career. Now, I've tried to include the edited highlights of Joseph's life, and we'll start with his life at sea. John Marshall's Royal Naval biography of 1823 has much of interest on Joseph's exploits and postings, which can today be cross-referred with historical detail about the vessels on which he served, which have been copiously and fastidiously uploaded to the internet by enthusiasts of the age of sail. These details variously include dates, deployments, officers aboard, and actions involved in quite a mine of information. Joseph's naval career began in 1779 with a posting as a midshipman on 32-gun frigate HMS Virginia, commanded by then Captain John Ord, who had become something of a mentor to young Joseph. He took part in the rout and destruction of the American fleet at Penobscot and the capture of Charleston in 1780, where he was unlucky enough to lose an arm, having been hit by a shot from Sullivan's Island. Being 17 years ahead of Nelson in this respect doesn't seem to have harmed his career. And it's worth noting that images of Long John Silver and even Captain Hook to one side, in those times of cutlass, cannonball, grape shot and gangrene, missing a limb could be the price for being alive. In an altogether more brutal world, it killed you or you got on with it. After recovering, the biography details further vessels served on, with Ord as captain, on the American, Leith, North Sea and English Channel stations until 1783, when brief peace allowed him to be sent for education abroad. The Royal Gazette tells us that Joseph was appointed surveyor of vessels in Bermuda in 1786, which certainly suggests that he would have been on the island for a period prior to that appointment. And it may well be that this was the period of his education abroad, mentioned in the biography. There's some uncertainty in the order of events here. Accordingly to John Marshall, writing in 1823, Joseph returned to the Royal Navy after completing his education, joining HMS Camilla, then leaving that ship to join Ord in Dominica. The most rational explanation would simply be that Marshall was not aware of Joseph's sojourn back home in Bermuda. But whether he was or not, we can be sure that we are following the right man, and that subsequent mentions of him are corroborated by contemporary newspaper reports. In June 1789, the Royal Gazette tells us that Joseph left the island at his post as surveyor of vessels to command the government brig at Barbados. This is either a misunderstanding or a reporting error. Not much changes. Subsequently blindly repeated by others, as in fact he left to join Ord, who was at that time governor of Dominica, and never of Barbados. As we shall see later, one could speculate that it may have suited Joseph very well to leave his post and depart to Dominica, given that the timing coincided conveniently well with the birth of outside child Robert Packwood. The Dominican connection reverberates in Joseph's will, with an eye-watering £1,100 being bequeathed to Ord's then secretary, a Miss Eliza Frances Brown of Rosso. Eye-watering as today, that sum will be worth around $180,000, which suggests that perhaps they were more than just friends. In 1794, Joseph was still in command of the government brig, assisting in a tussle with the French over Martinique and Guadeloupe. In September 1796, Joseph was commissioned lieutenant, went to serve on HMS Perdrix under Captain William Fahey. Perdrix had been captured from the French in 1795, refitted and returned to British service. Perdrix's service history shows that she was stationed at English Harbour, Antigua, in January 1798, and her lieutenant, Lord Camelford, shot and killed Lieutenant Peterson, who was acting captain in Fahey's absence, in a dispute over who was senior. An eventful time for sure, but crucially for this exercise, it puts Joseph on Antigua during a period which could well coincide with the birth of a further outside child, his daughter Maria, an Antigua-based beneficiary detailed in his will. Joseph's next vessel was another of the ships at that time stationed at Antigua, HMS Matilda. Matilda was also a repurposed French ship, which under the command of Captain Henry Mitford enjoyed a successful time in the waters around the Leeward Islands, preying on French privateers, cargo and naval ships, in what would have been an immensely profitable period. Royal Navy warships were known for what amounted to government-sanctioned piracy, with the substantial bounties paid for captured ships and valuable cargoes offering crew members, all the ship's companies shared in the spoils, a tidy income. This cleverly and perhaps cynically gave the whole crew the self-interested motivation and bloodlust to succeed. HMS Matilda sailed for England in 1799, where she became became a hospital ship on the Thames at Woolwich. Joseph then closely followed Sir James Saumarez, serving aboard a number of ships, including HMS Caesar, on which he saw action against the French and Spanish in the 1801 Battle of Algeciras Bay, and on HMS Diomede, based at Guernsey. In October 1804, Admiral Sir John Ord, as flag officer on HMS Glory, was joined by his protege Joseph as a senior lieutenant. Next came command of HMS Wasp in March 1805, and a return to his old haunt, the Leeward Islands, probably with the fillip of putting into Bermuda en route. Joseph must have won the respect and friendship of his officers and crew, being presented with a handsome sword which he left in his will. Promotion to commander came in January 1806, in command of His Majesty's sloop Childers in 1808 till 1811. It's in command of Childers, based at Leith, Edinburgh, on the east coast of Scotland, that Joseph appears most in the printed record, with news of action against Danish vessel the Frankenstein appearing, among other publications, in the London Gazette in November 1808. In it, Joseph details the chase and capture, including the recapture of British ship Nelson, which had earlier been taken by the Danish vessel. An 1809 print, held by the National Maritime Museum, shows Childers assisting HMS Egeria in capturing a Danish cutter, the Aalborg, on the 3rd of February of that year, off the northern tip of Denmark, Childers on the left. An example Edinburgh newspaper report of June 1809 gives an interesting insight into how Joseph may have made some of his fortune, with the prize Danish vessel captured by Childers and her substantial cargo advertised for sale by auction. It wouldn't take many auctioned ships and cargoes to make a very considerable sum, with the lion's share going to commander and senior officers. The example prize vessel was a 68-ton single-masted galliot, Emmanuel. Her cargo included over 49 tons of cod, ling and other fish, 50 barrels of herring, 24 barrels of oil and much else besides. Regulations sensibly allowed perishable cargoes to be sold off immediately without waiting for tardy permission. Prize auctions were a serious business. A fascinating 1810 letter from Joseph to the Royal Humane Society, reproduced in the Perthshire Courier, gives some insight into officer and crew relations aboard Childers. A young crew member who couldn't swim had fallen from the fore-yard arm and was saved from drowning. George Wilson, the master who performed the rescue, was recommended for acknowledgement. Wilson was presented with an inscribed sword by the officers and crew to celebrate selfless action. On Valentine's Day, 1811, Joseph was promoted to post-captain and, now 49 years old, took the opportunity to retire from active duty at sea, coinciding with Childers herself being withdrawn from service and broken up. While in command of Childers, he was successful in capturing numbers of foreign ships, the spoils of which, once condemned as prizes, would have been distributed following registration at the High Court of Admiralty. The paperwork following each of these took a long while to grind through, and as all hands aboard at the time of capture were rewarded, there was an obligation to try to ensure that all were made aware. Details were published in the London Gazette, the official public record, as a matter of course by intermediary agents tasked with distribution. There are numbers of examples, including covering the period when Joseph, then no longer at sea, was still dealing with the results of Childers' earlier success. Letters to the Admiralty of August and October 1814 advised them of his intended movements in France on leave, with a request to extend his stay to acquire knowledge of the French language. Clearly, the early 19th century Royal Navy was a more progressive and sympathetic employer than we may have been led to believe. As time progressed, Joseph became an advocate for wounded naval personnel. with early evidence in a letter sent to the Admiralty in September 1815, where he noted that under new regulations, army officers wounded in action qualified for a pension, that he had lost an arm as a midshipman, and that he sought equal treatment for naval personnel. It should be noted from the tone here that Joseph was using his personal example to give some gravitas to his demand for the benefit of the many. He must have stirred the Admiralty pot quite vigorously, as a newspaper report from May 1816 shows he'd been added to the Royal Navy pension list, recorded as a wounded officer. Joseph became more involved with charitable work and raising money for sick and injured sailors. There are a number of newspaper reports which name him in connection with humanitarian endeavours. A January 1822 edition of the Public Ledger and Daily Advertiser carries a plea for funds for a hospital ship charity, patron of which, rather grandly, was King George IV, with Joseph listed among those who had already contributed. A Morning Post article of April 1822 includes Joseph in a list of members present at a meeting of the Naval Charitable Society, of which his friend and mentor, Sir John Ord, was a vice president. He then appears in later reports, holding positions including treasurer and later chairman of the London branch of the Royal Naval and Newton Society, a Plymouth-based insurance company designed for the benefit of widows and orphans of naval officers. The Royal Naval and Newton Society collected, invested, and generated considerable sums, and holding an executive position in London, Joseph would have been at the very heart of the financial engine which drove it forward. This, of course, would have put him at a strong advantage with his personal investments, and will have seen his fortune blossom. In 1831, we have Joseph's rather shaky signature. It's down towards the bottom of the page. As a witness to his daughter Mary Ann Elizabeth's marriage to Augustus Berthoud, a Swiss national at St Marylebone, London. Perhaps poor Joseph had lost his dominant arm. My own experience with disabled aviators tells me that try as you might, no amount of time, train the wrong hand to write as fluently as you might hope. Joseph's will, written in 1832, is the next confirmed sighting we have, followed by later codicils. At this time, he was London-based, perhaps a resident at the 51 George Street address, in a letter of his reproduced in the Bermuda Royal Gazette in August 1833, gratefully acknowledging the gift of an ornate snuff box given for his service with the Royal Naval and Newton Society. George Street has been redeveloped since his occupancy, but some of the buildings of the time still stand, including those opposite, but sadly not including number 51. A wide and prosperous street, it would have made a splendid place to live. This Royal Gazette newspaper report tells us that Joseph, though in London, was still of considerable interest to Bermudians. The next we hear is of his death in Naples on the 28th of November, 1835. At this time, he was staying with his daughter Mary and her husband Augustus, who had been in Naples for some time, as this is detailed in the 1832 will. Joseph was buried at the English cemetery, Naples, which was formed in the garden of the church Santa Maria della Fede, in the heart of the old city. The site became derelict before being developed as a park, with most of the memorials being removed. Though usefully, the inscription on his headstone was recorded in a 1907 magazine article. It is today a peaceful, green and tree-speckled space behind high walls, accessed through penetrating gateways. The inscription for Joseph sadly included his first grandchild through Mary, Cecil, shared his grave in August 1836, aged only 10 months. The date suggests that Joseph will at least have met this young addition to the family, and it seems likely he'd gone to Naples, especially for the birth. Those are the facts, but what should we be allowed to read into them? Joseph's will fills in many of the blanks we may have had. With its family references, puts beyond doubt that he was the boy in the painting. That he grew into a responsible and caring man will be as much to do with his suffering as his life experiences, and testament to the warmth of family life home in Bermuda. Naming 3 outside children in his will makes a number of statements. They carried his name, they were free, not enslaved, and there's every reason to believe this was always the case. He must have kept in touch with them, knowing as he did where they were. His daughter Maria on Antigua remains a mystery, though it may be possible to follow inquiries on the island, particularly if she survived Joseph, as becoming instantaneously wealthy in 1836 may have left some written echoes. Daughter Mary raises some unanswered questions. She and Augustus had 5 known children in Naples, the last of which, Albert, emigrated from Europe to America in 1863. Usefully, the 1910 federal census picked him up and shows that his mother was born in the West Indies, the only written record yet found. From ship service records, we know that Joseph was based in British waters for 1808, so her birth date must allow for that. Records exist for Childers, and it seems that Joseph temporarily left the period in 1809. One could speculate that this may have been to do with his child. Though under sail, visiting the Caribbean would have been quite an undertaking. In any event, it's clear that at some time, whether as a child or adult, Mary made the journey from the West Indies to London. If with Joseph or independently, we'll never know. But this does remind us that Joseph kept in touch with his children. Further work may discover and track descendants of the Berthold family, with a view to establishing, among other things, Mary's ethnicity. It's not beyond possibility that Mary was, like her half-sister Maria, also a product of Antigua. But at this distance in time, we're unlikely ever to know. There is, of course, still a raised eyebrow. The suggestion that Ord's Dominican secretary, Miss Eliza Frances Brown, may also be a candidate for motherhood, winning as she did so handsome a legacy. But we need more than Joseph's spyglass to find the answer from this far away. This brings us to Bunny's 3rd great-grandfather, Robert Packwood, free man of colour. The line is firm, with the provenance of an unbroken paper trail and the rubber stamp of DNA matching with cousins. Even so, I can't guarantee where Robert was born, even if for certain in Bermuda, though Clara Hollis Hallett picked him up, unconnected by her to Joseph, and gave him a birth date of November 1782. She gave no details of a baptism, and it seems this date comes from subtracting the given age at death in his October 1882 burial record, an enchanting yet agonizing 99 years, 11 months. For lack of other evidence and with nothing else to prove, that back calculation would be seen as firm. And with nothing, and we wouldn't ruffle any feathers. I used exactly the same route to find a birth year for Joseph. However, this time there is other evidence and much else to prove. The idea that Robert almost made 100 had some weight and was even included in his Royal Gazette death notice. The bold line, nearly a centenarian, misspelled, as there weren't many centenarians about to practice on. However, Robert's entry in the Register of Deaths shows that he was instead a still creditable 94 years old, the informant being Bunny's great-great-grandmother, Robert's daughter, Henrietta Sondy. She would have been very well aware of the fuss surrounding the novelty of reaching 100, but clearly chose to set the record straight at the last. That he nearly made 100 was a fanciful notion, but as he began to see it come over the horizon, perhaps an ambition which Robert himself would probably have done nothing to discredit, further indulged, of course, by the newspaper. The age of 94 indicates that he was born in 1788, firmly within his putative father's known service as surveyor of vessels in Bermuda. If Clara was right instead, birth in 1782 still leaves Joseph a candidate for fatherhood, as he was fairly likely then back in Bermuda with his family, recuperating from the loss of his arm. A record of Robert's baptism may have existed, but I wouldn't expect this to have included an unmarried, well-to-do white father's name. So the island registers probably wouldn't have proven the link. We know that Robert was based in Bermuda in September 1819, as the Royal Gazette carried an unclaimed letters note, letting him know that mail was waiting for him at the post office at Hamilton. With a little beautiful serendipity, it also mentions that he was with Margaret Peggy Hinson and Smiths, who at the time was the owner of Ruth, the woman Robert would later marry, and their child, Robert James. More children would follow, of course, including Henrietta, Bunny's great-great-grandmother. Robert next came into the written record later that same year in a November 1819 Bahamas police document, copied the following year into the Bermuda Books of Miscellanies, which shows that he'd produced proof he'd been declared free by decree of the Court of Vice Admiralty, that he was registered in Nassau as a free man. It's important to recognise here that a declaration of freedom should not be construed to be a grant of freedom, rather legal affirmation that he was already free. In order to show that he was a free man to the court, juryless and chaired by the island governor, at that time the long-standing Charles Cameron, it may only have taken Robert to demonstrate who his father was. It wouldn't be wild speculation that a well-known, respected, compassionate senior naval officer who acknowledged him and gave him his name may also have provided him confirmation of the same. Proof he was a free man of colour, no small thing, allowed him to go about his business as he pleased, with much less risk of being taken for an absconding slave. There would still have involved some bravery to venture beyond where this was known, clearly including to the Bahamas prior to his court appearance. Now here I wish that Cyril Atterbridge Packwood and I had a chance to sit down and discuss things. Robert and this document are mentioned in Chained on the Rock, with the inference that Robert had earned his freedom from slavery, granted in Nassau, Bahamas. A bright vision indeed, but the truth may more likely be that Robert never was a slave. Cyril didn't have the benefit of Joseph's will as source material, though he did have access to the slave registers, but didn't say if he'd found Robert then. Cyril also missed that Robert had mail waiting for him in Hamilton back in September that same year, well before his declaration of freedom in the Bahamas. Not something generally expected for a slave. There's every chance it was a letter from his father, who we know kept in touch with his children. Cyril went on to detail Robert's £65 purchase of his son Robert James Packwood Jr. in November 1822 from Margaret Hinson, after what he imagined to be a period of gradual saving, which may though have been a good deal quicker and easier than Cyril supposed. Robert married Hinson's slave Ruth in January 1827 at St Mark's, before going on to buy her and their young daughter Rachel's freedom in the summer the same year for £90. The following year, he bought father-in-law Samuel from the Hinson family. But this and related matters are the core of another story. We need here to prove the link between this Robert Packwood and his supposed father Joseph. And here we'll turn to Robert's son, Robert James. Several April and May 1846 issues of the Bermuda Royal Gazette carry an advertisement of the coming sale by auction of Underwood, a 65-acre estate on St George's on the 19th of May. To bring this time more realistically to the mind's eye, the 19th of May edition has on the same page a notice to mariners, finally detailing a newly completed aid to safe navigation built on the south of the island. Later, of course, this will be known as Gibbs Hill Lighthouse. The successful bidder at auction was Robert's son, sometime mason and grocer, Robert James Packwood, for a very reasonable £604. It may have helped that the auctioneer was none other than spyglass inheriting John Henry Trott, who will not have forgotten the generosity shown to his family in Joseph Packwood's will. Robert James and John Henry were cousins, after all. It may also help that the seller, London-based John Pelly Atkins, had inherited Underwood and much else besides from his fabulously wealthy father John in 1837, and may well have viewed it as little more than a colonial irrelevance among the mighty portfolio he'd come into. In any event, neither his relationship with the auctioneer nor Mr. Atkins' likely indifference will have harmed Robert James's interests. Taking into account the effect of inflation in the period since then, various sources show that in a realistic estimate in today's money, £604 is around $100,000 now, which still seems a bargain until you remember that specifically real estate inflation during the period has run at a far, far greater rate. However, putting that caveat to one side, the equivalent of $100,000 is a good deal more than a 32-year-old ex-slave with 4 children might expect to have available in 1846. Until that is, his father's inheritance in his grandfather's will is taken into account. Robert Packwood was the direct beneficiary of £300 in cashable interest-paying stocks, and additionally £100 cash. Same amounts were also bequeathed to his sister Maria in Antigua, with the instruction that if she had died or could not be found, then her share would also go to Robert. That's a fairly likely scenario, and would have resulted in Robert coming into a total of £800 in 1836. Certainly, he would have had enough to help his only son make an impact on the property ladder 10 years later, even without the addition of Maria's share. I wondered, agonised about how to go about proving that link, until in a Gibbs Hill light bulb moment, I realised the auction bid for Underwood itself was the proof, hiding in plain sight. Without paperwork to follow to establish precisely what went on all those years ago, it's surely just as telling to follow the money instead, perhaps more so. It simply wouldn't be credible to suggest that such a large amount would have come from anywhere else, especially when the proof that he had the funds available is already so clearly in front of us, safely locked UK National Archives. As time moved on, land on the Underwood estate at Ferry Reach would later form the site of Vincent Astor's magnificent Bermuda home. From a recent historical perspective, that's a well-trodden path. But were it not for decisions made by the man who grew from the boy in the painting, 100 years before Astor's involvement, the stepping stones that led there would not have been in place. In all likelihood, it would not have happened. Joseph had remarkable depth of character. His beginnings in privilege, but developed through adversity. This fueled his commitment to his mixed-race, illegitimate children in times of slavery, and should be better known. There are lessons here for us all. There's more still to give on Joseph and Robert, and this can be seen as part of a longer story, with threads digressing into the seams of Bermudian life and history. I was delighted to confidently ink Joseph, my wife's Bermuda tree. There may be no Packwood genes in my own DNA, but I've come to know enough about their strengths to be very proud and grateful that my children share that legacy. There is Bunny and Judy and Pat. Verdemont House a couple of years ago. If you'd like a copy of the full text with references for this talk, You can get that from Anna at BNT. Drop her a line. I'm sure she'll be very happy to let you have that.
Thank you so much, Emma. My goodness gracious me, I was hooked from start to finish. The depth of your investigation and research is extraordinary, and any new light that we can bring to any aspect of Verdemont are just grasped with both hands. So I'm going to throw it out to people and see if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask. If so, please either put them in the chat or put a hand up in the chat, and please ask away. I can see a fair few familiar names on the list here.
I can see one in particular as well, Kelly D'Souza. Hi, Kelly.
Hang on, let me just make sure that participants can unmute themselves. There we go. So you should all be able to unmute yourselves now. Do apologise.
Hi, Emrys.
Hiya.
Hi, Judy.
That sounded very much like Judy to me.
That was.
Hey, Emrys. Hi, Judy.
Hi.
Hi, Judy. Say hi, Dad.
Hi, how you doing? You all right?
Yes, I'm good.
I love this chit chat.
You know.
Do we have any questions, Diana? I can see you've unmuted yourself, Diana Chudley. Do you have a question for Emrys?
Thank you. That was very impressive. I hope when you next come to Bermuda that maybe we can meet.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm actually. We hope to have a chance to go over there next year. So certainly, keep that in mind. If you get in touch, I suppose through Anna again, if you want to make that happen, that'd be.
That's fine, Diana.
I'm loading.
Water aerobics. Did you hear me?
No.
Diana Chudley and I go to water aerobics together, Emrys.
Oh, okay.
So I'll take you to water aerobics when you get here.
Thank you very much indeed. Do they take place at Whale Bay?
No, National Stadium in the pool.
I'd rather be at Whale Bay.
I know you like Whale Bay.
Maybe you'll say hello to me at tomorrow at water aerobics.
Yes, we have water aerobics tomorrow.
Do we have any questions of a historical nature?
Okay.
I'm the one
Sorry.
on 2 poles.
Good afternoon. If I may jump in a little, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name is actually Menard Packwood.
Good evening, Menard.
Hello, I believe I received your phone call when you mentioned the will to me. I am particularly interested in learning a lot more here. We had done some of our own research and we did not make the connection to Joseph Packwood. And we were really quite interested to figure out or to find out that he had children of color. And I think in particular, when you talk about the property that was purchased, you're actually talking about Ferry Reach.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So
that's correct, yes.
Yeah, so I actually have, and I'm not exactly sure if I'm a direct descendant, but a friend of mine who we actually do call cousin, Laura Lynn Jackson, is a direct descendant of the persons of the Packwoods that were in Ferry Reach. And if we can, I would like to see if I can learn a lot more about, Robert Packwood's descendants, I guess, in Ferry Reach, to see if we can sort of grow that family tree, because we're not exactly sure of the connection.
Right.
So I was extremely interested, and I really do appreciate the presentation because it actually speaks volumes.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's the Robert James Packwood at Ferry Reach, the Underwood estate there. I'm in touch with two threads of family at present day who descend from there. So I can sort of stitch you guys together if you like.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much. I'm very, very interested in that.
Yeah. perhaps Menard, Anna could give you my email address, and then I can take this up with you independently.
Yes, no, perfect. Thank you very much.
Oh, no problem.
Cheers.
Get in touch with me, and I'll put you both in touch with each other.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I'll be firing you an email tonight. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Menard. Any other questions this evening? Diana, did you have a question?
I'm overwhelmed.
It is overwhelming, isn't it, Diana? It's
The depth of this research is fantastic. And it's lovely to have this to add to the Verdemont research.
absolutely.
I wrote the booklet on Verdemont and the old house book on Verdemont, but we're always learning. There's always something new.
And it was astonishing, you know, it was only because Emrys had used the images on Ancestry, and I'm doing this trawl around as I normally did, and I come across these images, and then we get talking, and he's doing this incredible research on one of the people in our portraits, and talk about falling into the lap of the gods. It's just been absolutely incredible. If anybody has any other questions, now's the chance. Other than that, I'm just going to say, Emrys, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It's just been an extraordinary trust talk.
It was. Sorry, it was an absolute pleasure to do the talk, and I can say it was an absolute pleasure to do the research into Joseph in the first place.
Well,
took a while, but it's worth it.
You've made a whole raft of new Bermudian friends. I can assure you of that. And when you're next over here with Bunny, we're going to be clambering all over you. So
I look forward to it.
And I can't wait to take you around the house itself. It's going to be extraordinary. So again, on behalf of the Bermuda National Trust, thank you so much. Thank you so much to our participants for coming this evening and supporting this wonderful event. It's wonderful. So I'm going to end the meeting now and say good night, everybody.
Good night. It's a pleasure.
Good night. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Take care. Take care, sweetie.
We'll try our hardest.
All right. I'll give you a call on the weekend.
Okay, Judy.
Judy.
Okay.
Bye, Claire.
Good night.
Bye,
Thank you.
darling.
Good night.